Well, welcome to Diplomatic Channel. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Here's what's coming up on the program this week. Russia officially pulls out of the Black Sea grain deal, notifies the UN, Turkey, and Ukraine it will not renew the crucial deal that allowed Ukraine to export grain through the Black Sea. And then accuses the West of open sabotage and of selfishly putting the commercial interests of the deal ahead of its humanitarian goals. We'll be talking to experts on the issue. Plus, Tunisia and the EU signed deal to tackle irregular migration. That's Diplomatic Channel in a wrap. Let's check in on other discussions in diplomatic circles. We'll be right back.
The Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba is on a tour of African nations, the third time he will be visiting the continent against the backdrop of the worsening global food crisis after Russia's withdrawal from the Black Sea Grain Initiative. From July 23rd to the 24th, the Ukrainian Foreign Minister begins his tour with a visit to Equatorial Guinea, where he will hold talks with the country's leadership on the development of bilateral relations, increasing volume of trade, ensuring food security in Africa, and supporting President Vladimir Zelensky's peace formula. Back in January last year, Ukraine approved the African strategy in which the Ukrainian president, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and parliamentary diplomacy significantly intensified contacts with African countries. Meanwhile, Turkey's Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan has ruled out the possibility of a grain deal without Russia, saying it would have a potential risk for security. The Black Sea grain deal was brokered a year ago by the United Nations and Turkey to combat a global food crisis worsened by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Finally, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni says illegal flows of migrants are damaging all countries across the Mediterranean as she sought to forge a broad alliance of nations to fight human trafficking.
Russia has officially pulled out of the Ukraine grain deal, raising wheat prices sharply on the global markets after it said that it would treat ships heading for Ukrainian ports as potential military targets. Moscow has also warned that any ships going there will be seen as siding with the Kyiv regime. Now, this grain deal was brokered by the United Nations and Turkey last July, aimed at alleviating a global food crisis by allowing Ukrainian grain blocked by the Russia-Ukraine conflict to be exported safely. On Monday, July 17, Russia announced it had halted participation in a landmark UN-brokered deal, which allowed Ukrainian grain to be exported through the Black Sea, just hours after Moscow said Ukraine had attacked the Crimean Bridge. The Kremlin said the halting of the Black Sea grain deal, brokered by the United Nations and Turkey to combat a global food crisis worsened by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, had nothing to do with the bridge attack. The announcement, however, sent ripples around the world, raising concerns not just about food crisis, but about food security. The EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, and the EU's Council President, Charles Michel, condemned the Russian announcement. To the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, Russia's withdrawal from the deal means a related pact between the UN and Moscow to help facilitate Russia's grains and fertilizer exports was also terminated.
I deeply regret the decision by the Russian Federation to terminate the implementation of the Black Sea Initiative, including the withdrawal of Russian security guarantees for navigation in the northwestern part of the Black Sea. This initiative has ensured the safe passage of over 32 million metric tons of food commodities from Ukrainian ports. And the World Food Programme has shipped more than 725,000 tons to support humanitarian operations, relieving hunger in some of the hardest hit corners of the world, including Afghanistan, the Horn of Africa, and Yemen. The Black Sea Initiative, together with the Memorandum of Understanding on facilitating exports of Russian food products and fertilizers, have been a lifeline for global food security and a beacon of hope in a troubled world.
An end to the deal would mean that countries mainly in the Middle East and Africa could suffer a food crisis. Somalia, where failed rains for the past 3 years and relentless conflict between state forces and Islamist militants have forced millions to flee their homes, has been one of the biggest beneficiaries of the Black Sea Grain Initiative. It received 84,000 tons of wheat from Ukraine in 2022, up from 31,000 tons in 2021, according to the UN data, as donors stepped up assistance to fend off a looming famine in certain areas. The Kremlin had also mentioned on Monday it was quitting the pact to improve its own grain and fertilizer exports, which had not been met. Russia has complained that not enough grain has reached poor countries. The United Nations, which brokered the deal alongside Turkey, has argued the arrangements benefited those states by helping lower food prices more than 20% globally. The UN World Food Programme has also turned heavily to Ukrainian grains to feed people in countries suffering from conflict and extreme weather, including Somalia, Yemen, and Afghanistan. 2 days after its announced withdrawal from the deal, Russia launched an extensive air attack on the Ukrainian city of Odessa, an assault dubbed by authorities as hellish onslaught, meant to destroy the possibility of shipping Ukrainian grain from its ports. The military said the strike hit a grain and oil terminal and damaged tanks and equipment for loading. The attack started a fire at the port and a commercial warehouse on the outskirts of Odessa. Let's get some perspective on this now. I'm joined on the program by agripreneur and managing director, BO Farms Limited, Mr. Tunde Banjoko. He joins me from Lekki here in Lagos. Thank you, Mr. Banjoko, for joining me on the program.
Thank you, Amarachi, for having me.
Now that Russia has pulled out of the Black Sea Grain Initiative, will this further push global food prices to record highs? And then what does it portend for the African market?
Of course, it has started pushing it already. So it's not a matter of is it going to push it, because I think barely 24 hours that that declaration was done, we observed 2.5% increase in price of grain. And in less than a week, there's been about 8% increase in the price of grain already. So for us, especially the country, Africa, Asia, the Middle East are going to be the worst hit of this decision. So it's affecting us already.
And the sharp increase in grain after the Russian invasion last year, we saw that leading to a rise in global food prices, not just for grains, but also for meat, for poultry, as animals are often fed with grains. Are we also likely to see the same trend this year? I mean, how much of an impact is this information now causing on, the other markets apart from grains?
The information is already impacting our grain market already. I will use Nigeria as an example. Just even within the last 1 month, the price of maize has gone from about 260,000 per ton to 380 to 400,000 per ton. Because what was observed was that in the last few months, especially in June, Russia has actually started reducing the number of ships allowed to go to Ukraine to pick grain. So the volume of grains that have been pushed to the African market has actually reduced. And I think that's why we saw, even in the last 1 month, there's been a sharp increase in price of maize within the country, maize, soya, and some other products, such as wheat. All the products that we relied on, and most African countries actually relied on grain. This corridor gives us about 30% of the grains that we use. So, countries like Somalia, Sudan, Ethiopia, some of them rely entirely even on these grains. Unlike some of us that still have a bit of quantity that we are releasing, some rely entirely 100% on this supply. So we're already being affected, and the impact on our poultry is already being felt in the market already in Nigeria and some other African countries, because some are already even shutting down. Because when you look at the forecast that most farmers had as projection, the number is about almost 50% on the increase already. So most people can't even cope, and they are shutting down already. Those who have financial obligations to financial institutions are already running into debt, and it's really not a good situation for anybody.
For you as an agripreneur, how are you mitigating, the changes that are going on? How is it impacting on your business, your farms, and how are you trying to cope with that?
To be candid, what some of us are doing now is to look for cheaper funds to fund our projects. We are looking for, because some of us have loans running 30% already from commercial banks. So now is to run to banks that can give you single digit government-owned institutions so that you can probably reduce the liability you have. Of course, one of the other ways is also looking for patient investors who can be considerate enough in their expected returns. And then what we've also done is to look at the things we can do internally that without relying on products that are being imported. We are looking at, for example, on one of our farms, what are we talking of? Instead of buying fertilizers at the moment, we are looking at how we can explore the manures from the poultry sector. That is cheaper for us. We can at least go pick that up. We are also looking at how we can combine our own feed rather than buying already prepared feed. So that's, and then of course it's also impacting on labor. We are also reducing our labor cost. Of course, that also has its own implication, but those are some of the ways we've been doing just to reduce the cost of operations and the liability to investors and financial institutions. But it's been challenging, I must admit that.
Yeah, I can imagine it's been challenging because they sound like measures that you put in place as soon as the war started, but with the
Yeah.
announcement of Russia now that it's pulling out of the deal, and then the attacks that Russian authorities, the Russian military has carried out on the port of Odessa, carried out in Mykolaiv, that is further that would further impact the markets that you're hoping
Current situation.
to exactly. So what are your own plans to help to mitigate that as you move forward?
What we are doing now is we are reviewing the situation at the moment. Uh, it's because there's still a dichotomy, kind of. Some are saying it's a suspension, some are saying it's a termination. And then if you look, this is really not the first time this declaration is coming, or sometimes around November last year, there was a temporary suspension, and after some time, there was negotiation. They came back to the table. The deal was supposed to be for every 4 months. Well, but what we observed was in March, they renewed for 2 months. In May, they renewed for 2 months. By around June, Russia reduced the number of ships that they allowed into Ukraine. So, and of course, Russia also gave some conditions for which they could go back to the table. So we are hoping that, the time frame of 3 months given by Russia to meet that the Western world should meet some of those conditions. We are hoping the Western world will meet those conditions. If those conditions are met, we are hoping that the deal will resume and this pressure on on the present grain market and food market will be reduced. We are also relying on the fact that the federal government of Nigeria, for example, has given an order to release fertilizers and grains to the farmers. Even though our grain size, our storage capacity is not that big, but we are hoping that the little that will be released will get to the farmers and these poor families so that that can bring down the pressure of what we're already facing. So we are hoping that will also impact the current situation and help stabilize things while we work on expanding our market in Africa. Because this is really, when you look at those that are affected, Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. But of course, we have to be concerned about Africa, about what is going on in Africa at the moment. So African leaders now need to start rising up to cultivating and producing more for their nations.
I'm wondering if you think, this grain deal can survive without Russia's inputs, without, Russia not, carrying out those missile strikes on, the port cities and just allowing things to just go on as they should without their own participation.
It will be difficult to go on without Russia's participation because if you look at what will be required, Russia is now saying any ship coming, any vessel coming in at the moment will be seen carrying weapons. And those nations with those ship, flags of those ships will be attacked. So the possibility of any of them getting insurance to move is critical. And then the other issue is Ukraine is exploring to say, okay, we'll go through Romania and then, or also exploring, we'll go through the land or through the rivers. But the land cannot, you cannot convey much on land or through river. Some other European nations that are neighbors to Ukraine are also concerned and not really willing that Ukraine will explore their borders and their rivers. So it's going to be difficult to go on with this deal without Russia coming to the table to have a good deal. I think Turkey is talking to them already. Even though Ukraine said, Ukraine spoke to the United Nations Maritime Agency and the International Maritime Unit to say, okay, we'll give compensation guarantee to any damaged vessel, ship owners, and all that. But I think most of them will still be very concerned and worried, skeptical about carrying their vessels to such destination until there's guarantee of the fact that there will be safety for their vessels. I'm not sure anybody will want to go to that territory at the moment.
Yeah, seriously tough times ahead for everyone. Thank you so much, Mr. Bandriko, for speaking with me. We're staying with Russia's decision to pull out of the Black Sea Grain Initiative and its impact on the rest of the world, especially here in Nigeria. Joining me now is the Deputy Head of Mission at the Ukrainian Embassy in Abuja, Mr. Ihor Chirinko. Thank you for joining me on the program.
Actually, thank you for your question.
What is the true state of the Black Sea port in Ukraine?
The true state, the true situation in the Black Sea ports of Ukraine now is very hard because Russia brutally exited the Black Sea Grain Initiative and began striking, shooting all the Ukrainian Black Sea ports. And what is much more cruel, the grain terminals, as well as burning by the missile civil infrastructure and oil, sunflower oil terminals, what you see now in the world's news with men's casualties, with civil casualties. This does not concern any military infrastructure, it just does concern that Russian missiles are burning Ukrainian grain in the Black Sea ports. So what is the situation now?
Is Ukraine able to export grain, and to where?
Yes, Ukraine is able, Ukraine was able, is able, and I'm sure would be able to export grain, and especially to the states of African continent, which are the most needed nations of Ukrainian grain, because more than 400 million people all over the world need Ukrainian grain. And as stated Mr. Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, our state will prolong the grain initiative.
I'm just wondering how has Russia withdrawing from the Black Sea Grain Initiative affected Ukraine?
Russia brutally quit the Black Sea Grain Initiative to blackmail a lot of nations of the world, because Ukraine now is not able to make exports as it was earlier, because Russian aim is to disable all the Ukrainian vessels to export anything. And now Russia is threatening to any vessels which are going to come to Ukrainian ports. And the main aim of Russia is to blackmail not only Ukraine, but to blackmail half of the world, which needs Ukrainian grain. Because as you see, and as I stated earlier, after Russia quit this vitally important Black Sea Grain Initiative, they began striking with the missiles to Ukrainian ports and to Ukrainian terminals, food terminals. But of course, another way, we are looking now for another way, and another way would be founded instead of Russian brutal terrorist acts.
Now, your government announced the shipment of grain to Africa sometime last year. Is that still feasible, knowing what has happened now?
Yes, Ukraine announced grain supplies, especially to the African states, and especially 25 tons of grain to Nigeria. It is made with the help of the World Food Programme, and nothing will change instead of Russian terrorist policy. We are looking with the United Nations as well as with Turkey their ways how to prolong the grain exports instead of Russian barbarianship, what they do in the Black Sea region.
So what support can you say Ukraine is receiving from the Nigerian government?
Ukraine has constructive relations with Nigerian government. Ukraine and Nigeria always had good relations, and we are developing it very strongly. For example, just in May, was the inauguration of Mr. Bola Tinubu. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine came to Nigeria, and it was the first visit of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine to Nigeria. And well, what support do we need now? We need first of all the support of Nigeria in the international organizations, in United Nations, the support of the resolutions to protect the territorial integrity of Ukraine. And we are very thankful to Nigerian side for voting in favor of such resolutions. And of course, after the brutal blowing up of the Kakhovka hydropower plant, which led to ecological disaster of the whole region in the south of Ukraine, and after this brutal Russian quit from the Black Sea Grain initiatives, we hope Nigeria would be deeply concerned by these actions of Russia.
How concerned is Ukraine about the huge food crisis that could result or has already resulted from, the attacks on Ukrainian ports?
Well, we are really deeply concerned, and actually all over the world, governments must be concerned by these brutal, cruel, and barbarian actions of Russia. Of course, what do they do? It is unimaginable. In the 21st century, Russian missiles kill peaceful people and destroy grain, destroy oil, destroy dozens, thousand tons of grain which could go to Africa where it is needed. They burn it in Ukrainian seaports. Ukraine is deeply concerned, and we hope for the solid reaction of the world community, which will condemn such actions of Russia and which will protect little Ukraine from the huge terrorist Russian bear.
I know the Ukrainian embassy in Nigeria has been calling on Nigerian officials and calling for publicity to accuse Russia and to express its attitude out loud. Do you think this is feasible, knowing that Nigeria, like many other African countries, declares support for both Ukraine and for Russia?
Well, we expect that Nigerian government, as well as the governments of other African states, will be deeply concerned by the latest actions of Russia. Because what they do now, it's even not unfair. It's even not brutal. It's the real full-scale barbarianship. When hundreds of millions of people need food, they burn with their missiles the food in our seaports. When we are talking about the rights of children, they are killing children and they are sending on the heads of our children, of our peaceful people, their missiles. I think that every government of the world must be deeply concerned by such actions.
Well, Russia says Ukraine is using the ports for military activities. Ukraine is expecting more weapons from NATO countries. Has Ukraine been using its ports for more military activities than the shipment of grain?
It's impossible, and it is huge lie. What is saying Russia? It is crazy, huge lie. Ukraine had never used grain corridors to achieve some weapons from NATO. Really, the NATO states, the powerful democratic states, support Ukraine and give us weapons, because Ukraine is very little and Russia is very big. But we do not get these weapons through the grain corridors. Even stupid men can understand it. Every god can understand, even not Russian politicians can understand that Ukraine has another ways to achieve Western weapons. And these ways are not the grain corridors. Russia is looking for any case to make its huge lie. But every people who understand something in geography, in history and in military science will of course understand that it is impossible, and Ukraine never used our seaports to receive weapons, and especially from NATO.
Mr. Chirinko, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you for your time on Diplomatic Channel. Tunisia and the EU have signed a deal to tackle irregular migration, especially for those moving in breach of rules. Tunisia has become the main departure point for migrants trying to cross the Mediterranean to Europe. EU has been struggling to cope with the influx of migrants numbering about 72,000, making the journey this year alone more cumbersome, mostly to Italy, a deal which the EU describes as strategic and comprehensive, has a budget of $118 million to stop smuggling, strengthen borders, and return migrants in recent months. Black migrants in Tunisia have faced violent attacks due to an increasingly hostile environment. Tunisia's President Kais Saied has accused migrants of partaking in a plot to change the country's demographic profile, blaming traitors who are working for foreign countries.
Tunisian President Kais Saied and the European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen have signed a strategic partnership agreement that will help combat human traffickers. The message was passed across by the Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte via a social media post that says it contains agreements on disrupting the business model of people smugglers and human traffickers, strengthening border control, and improving registration and return, all essential measures for bolstering efforts to stop irregular migration. It comes a week before the Italian government waded into the crisis of illegal flow of migrants it says are damaging all countries across the Mediterranean. It also comes as Tunisian security forces have collectively expelled several hundred black African migrants and asylum seekers, including children and pregnant women, since July 2, 2023, to a remote, militarized buffer zone at the Tunisia-Libya border. Human rights groups have called on the Tunisian government to hold collective expulsions and urgently enable humanitarian access to the African migrants and asylum seekers already expelled to a dangerous area at the Tunisia-Libya border, with little food and no medical assistance.
Well, that's Diplomatic Channel this week. You can watch this and other episodes again on youtube.com/channelsweb. Just go to the playlist and search for Diplomatic Channel. I'm Amarachi Ubani. I'll see you next time.